Episode 4 of WandaVision dropped on Disney Plus earlier today, and it's not a sitcom. What does that mean? Let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies, TV, and Marvel way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Let me know, what did you think about episode 4, all the new reveals, and what it means for the season as a whole. As we go into this, it says spoiler in the title of the video, so spoil away, no need for spoiler warnings. To give you a heads up on how the video is going to work, first I'm going to give my spoiler-free thoughts on it. Next, I'm going to talk about the season as a whole. Keep in mind, my 3 previous reviews that I put out, I filmed all of those before episode 1 had even premiered. So I filmed over 2 weeks ago. So my full thoughts with 2 weeks of processing and talking with all of you and in light of this new episode. And then I'm going to do kind of a walkthrough of the episode, giving my thoughts on all the little specific things that happened. Then I'll give some closing thoughts at the end. You can see the time codes down below in the chapters if you want to skip ahead. With that said, let's get started with my spoiler-free thoughts on the episode. And if you've been tracking along, you know that my big frustration with the show, or not, I don't know if frustration is the right word, concern, the thing holding me back was the lack of context. And so what did I think about this episode? Without giving any specifics, it resolved my issues with the show thus far. It gave me some sort of point of reference to understand what I'm experiencing, what category to put it in. And it answered certain questions while leaving a bunch of other things still as a gigantic mystery as to what's going on. And I appreciated that. You see some familiar faces. That was kind of fun. I guess the other thing I would say before going into spoilers is that because this episode is essentially an exposition episode, it exists not to move the story forward. It exists for the purpose of giving context and perspective of everything we've seen up to this point in time. It certainly feels the kind of, in a sense, most generic of sorts. And I don't even mean that as an insult. I don't mean that like as anything like that. But whereas the first 3 were so weird, crazy, wacky, and you're watching something like, why are we in a sitcom? These ones feel much more like an episode of a TV show set in the world of the MCU where we're investigating something. Much more traditional in nature. Make of that what you will, but I think this was what I needed with this particular show to help me kind of lock in a little bit more, give me something more tangible to be able to enjoy it. From there, let's move on to my thoughts of the series as a whole. So all my previous reviews were shot over 2 weeks ago before the series premiered. So I didn't have any time to really process them. I just turned it on, phase 4, and no context, watched these 3 sitcom episodes with just little hints of what's kind of going on. And having an episode that essentially runs parallel to all of that, and even kind of rewinds before the show started a little bit, I think that's kind of, it helps you have something, the hooks to latch onto, where it's not, up to this point in time, the show's kind of been like this slow IV drip of answers or questions, context, teases of what's going on. Like, okay, gotcha. I think I see kind of where a little bit of this is going. Okay, that's interesting. But it's a slow IV drip. And this is the one where you're actually kind of getting the shot in the arm, the kind of the full deal, the full dosage of context to interpret everything going on. And with a show like this, where it's intentionally removing you from everything you've known before, dropping you in the middle of it, it's pretty important to eventually give me my bearings. And that's what this was. I'm very intrigued at where this is going. And my feelings on I don't really even know my feelings on the whole with this season, because it's the type of show that's designed to build intrigue. And so my thoughts on the season as a whole depend on the payoff of all of that. If you get to the end of it and there's all this intrigue and mystery and then it's a terrible payoff, then it's like, okay, that was a big waste of my time. If it's an awesome payoff, it makes you want to rewatch the whole thing so you can catch every reference, every little thing that happened. But we're not quite there yet. So I'm enjoying the mystery, the intrigue, especially now that we have the context and you see all these things that happen in those first three episodes from this alternate perspective from the outside. And once again, it makes you reinterpret everything that you saw before. So I can't wait to see the next episode and how they intertwine the sitcom with the outside world, with whatever else is kind of going on inside the midst of all this. Since they keep making little references to death and devils and all kinds of prisoners and things like that, what exactly does all of that mean? From there, let's move right along to our walkthrough of the episode. So essentially, it kicks off right in that moment where Hulk snapped. Hulk snaps in Endgame, and then we jump to a hospital with Monica kind of reforming. I love to see stuff like this of like, okay, something crazy wild just happened, but what was that like in a normal place? We got like the gag version of it in Spider-Man Far From Home, but now we get to see like a more serious version of it that's not played for laughs. Like what happens in a hospital? What happens to normal people somewhere when this goes down? And I think it was executed really nicely, especially in light of we've seen just enough world building in the first world bending. There's world building going on, but world bending in the first three episodes that when it starts and you see her kind of forming together, at first I'm thinking like, okay, what reality is she forming into? Is this a new episode? What's kind of happening here? And then she runs into the hallway and pretty quickly you're like, wait a minute, other people are oh, we're in the middle of the timeline of Endgame. And through this, you learned that her mother 5 years ago had cancer. She was there with her mother. If you didn't know this, if you'd forgotten this, her mother is Rambeau, Captain Marvel's friend. The house that they go to in the movie Captain Marvel, that's the mother that has cancer. And this is the little girl from that movie. In case you weren't aware of that, didn't catch that, the little references. And find out she had cancer 5 years ago, but she died 3 years ago. And the nurse is kind of like, well, you disappeared 5 years ago. And then a couple years after that, your mom passed away. I'm sorry. And so then it kind of cuts to the credits and does our little logo. And you're like, okay, now you're giving me some big context of this character, where we are inside of everything. Opens up and it says a month later, and we're at the Sword headquarters. And so in the previous three episodes, we saw little Sword logos showing up, little references, cameras zoomed out. You could see people working on stuff. We saw the people show up at the end of the third episode. And so, but we don't know, this agency hasn't really been explored. And so we're kind of going into this base. She walks in, tries to use her key card. It doesn't work. The guy working at the desk is like, if you worked here, your key card would work. Which struck me as a bit of an odd thing for him to say in light of the fact that, the apocalypse happened 5 years ago and then the apocalypse was undone. So I would think you'd be a little bit more sympathetic to the fact that oddities might take place. And so she says she's trying to meet with someone. A guy walks up. He's friendly, banter back and forth about how she hasn't aged and he has aged, and he's now in charge. Clearly they know each other. Clearly they have a past reputation. And then we have a scene of dialogue that exists basically to let us know what this organization is and about their technologies and the nature of the world and fear of usage of drones and fear from outer space, and kind of understanding that this guy basically rose to the top because he was the only person around, and she seems totally fine with this. She seems to not be cynical about it. She's accepting that this is the world that we're all in, but at the same time, there's that little bit of like, I was the only guy left, so that's why I'm here. And then throughout, as we're going through the halls, we learned that her mom founded this organization, was behind the whole deal, and this guy feels bad that Monica wasn't more involved in the process of creating everything that happened here. So a lot of interest, a lot of exposition, which the whole episode is just exposition and perspective, but interesting stuff, especially for a character that we saw in one context in the mid-90s in the movie Captain Marvel. And then we get kind of this whole history of what kind of took place in this 25-year time period. I don't know. I find that stuff interesting when the world gets fleshed out and we learn about everything goes on. So then she wants to get back to work, and apparently she can't do anything interesting. She's stuck on Earth missions, even though there's all this space stuff going on. And it hints at the fact that drones normally follow her. So she gets quite sure what exactly that means, but she's doing very interesting stuff normally. And now he's like, you can't do anything interesting right now. Like you're stuck here. And why is that? Your mom put in a policy when everybody returns, they're stuck on Earth. So sorry, it's your mom's fault though. And she's sent on this mission for a missing persons, which sounds very boring. Like, why are you missing persons? What is this? And teaming up with the FBI. So she starts driving down the road into Westview. So immediately we're like, okay, naturally that's okay. Understand what's going on here. And you see the town in the distance, and it looks kind of familiar to our TV show that we've been watching the last 3 episodes. She pulls up. Randall Park is there. Agent Wu from Ant-Man and the Wasp. And he's just Randall Park is just a fun actor that just has a very natural, amusing vibe about him. It's just very likable. And so you can have this guy saying and doing annoying stuff, and you feel sympathy for him just because of the faces that he makes. He just has that vibe to him. So it's always a pleasant surprise when he shows up. So the fact that he's the agent and then it happens to we're pulling characters from all these different movies, at a certain point in time starts to maybe strain a little bit of credibility, but at the same time, I'm willing to do that for the sake of having fun characters reappearing that are amusing in something like this. So he's investigating, and he's talking about how like it was a missing person and went to investigate, and then nobody knows who they are, and they go to talk to these police officers, and they're like, the city's called Eastview. And like, okay, what is going on here? Like, reality's being bent. And so it looks like you can see the city, but something weird is going on. And they say they even feel something odd. And so you don't know exactly what all those things mean. And I watched the episode twice and couldn't even quite piece together exactly what is being implied with all of these things that they're saying. But so they go over to grab the drone. This was actually why she was sent here. The FBI asked to borrow a drone, and she has to chaperone it. So they fly their drone in, and it disappears into the field. And immediately, we're piecing together like, wait a minute, episode 2. Okay, so that's what's going on here. The drone flew in, but the drone didn't look like this. It looked just a little bit different from it. So, okay, whatever goes in there gets transformed into the reality. So they're curious. She decides to walk up and fully embrace whatever's happening. Walks up, and she gets sucked in. Which, okay, now we understand how she got in there and why in the end of the episode they're like, she doesn't belong here. She doesn't have a home here. Okay, so she's an outsider that walked in. Everyone else has a home. Everyone else, okay. You start to piece together like, how does this work? So, okay, gotcha. Little bit of information helps a bit. And it cuts forward 24 hours in the future, and we're in a van, and Kat Denning makes her return after, 8 years now, returns to the franchise. Once again, that it happens to be side characters from 3 different movies, just happen to all be on the same case. Strains a little bit of credibility, but hey, it's fun. So let's forgive the fact that they're doing this. Some fun banter. Basically, she's piecing together that S.W.O.R.D. doesn't know what's going on, so they're just bringing in a bunch of experts. She shows up, starts fiddling around, and here's the thing where I think it starts getting important. She discovers that there's this CMDR, I might have got my letters wrong, radiation around the place. And then in the next conversation, nobody seems to know what this is until boss guy shows up. She says it to him, and the guy says, yeah, it's dormant radiation from the Big Bang. Then someone else says it's makes reality. They start spending a lot of dialogue explaining what this specific type of radiation is. Anytime an episode pauses to start explaining the science of their mumbo jumbo, and we get the terms defined, we hear the origin story of it, and we hear what it can do. If they pause to do all of that in an episode that's only 30 minutes long, this is important. So I'm imagining whatever our set of letters is that start with C that have radiation in the mix. I'm guessing that this is going to have something very important to do with this whole season. And then whatever goes on, whenever we get into Multiverse of Madness, something tying into this stuff that's dormant from the Big Bang involves creating realities and is creating this reality in some sense. That's important. So I'm going to be paying attention anytime our C-named radiation shows up in the show. So anyway, they start trying to figure out exactly what's going on, investigating, and she discovers that there's a signal inside of our radiation, C-letter radiation. So she pulls out a TV. I don't know why she figured out how to do all of this stuff, but she's the person that Kat Denning figures out you got to hook up an old school TV. Actual old broadcast signal is coming out of this deal. So it's legitimately an old school TV show. What we're watching is also what they're experiencing. So she discovers it and they start watching the first episode of WandaVision. And so as she's watching it, they start identifying the characters and they have this whole sequence where they actually like put up on the wall. We're like, all right, we know that Wanda Vision are in here. Okay. 2 Avengers have a sitcom now. That's weird. And one of them's dead. Even weirder. And they start naming these people that we've seen in the previous 3 episodes, like their real world name with their ID and everything. And if I'm not mistaken, they identify all these people that have been recurring, except Catherine Hahn's character. Catherine Hahn's character, the one that has with the first neighbor to show up to kind of greet them a little bit, has seemed to have a little bit more of an awareness at the end of episode 3. When neighbor guy is like, we're all, it seems like he's about to say we're all prisoners. And she's like trying to silence him and then rides off at the end, she's the one that's trying to like reset everything. And then we identify everybody else. And I didn't see on the little wall there, her being identified. Don't know what that means, but it seems like she is something different inside of whatever is going on here. She is different. She's the anomaly. And even with some of the marketing, what was in one of the trailers they put out 2 months ago, it seems like she's different.
Am I dead?
No. Why would you think that?
Because you are.
These other neighbors, I guess, were kidnapped and put in this reality to populate it. And then there's her. Whatever she is something a little bit different. I think she's also the one who was in episode 2 that made some reference to the devil being everywhere. Little stuff like that makes you go, she's not the same. Something is up with her. So anyway, they start running some other experiments to try and figure out what's going on. So they have a guy in a radiation suit go into the sewers to try and sneak in. And Agent Wu's like, I don't know if you can actually do this. And they're like, let's see what happens. And so then this plays out as he's B guy from the end of episode 2. Whenever he passes through the barrier, his radiation suit turns into B suit. And then the tether, the cable that was linked to him, snaps when he goes through and it winds back up and it turns into like a jump rope. Their cable turned into a jump rope. Then he goes in and where it's getting interesting is as they're watching the broadcast, they're not seeing everything that we saw. So there's gaps in the story. The other one that takes place is they realize, hey, it's a broadcast coming out. What if we could put a broadcast coming in? So they have them try and kind of call into the radios, which leads us into the middle of episode 2, where Wanda is talking at her little get-together. The lady she's talking to starts to snap out of it like, who are you? I think you are here to hurt us. And then the radio starts talking to them. And it sounded like it was Agent Wu when we heard the voice.
Wanda, can you read me? Who's doing this to you?
And then it's confirmed. As that scene is taking place, they start talking into it. And they realize that like they're trying to talk into it. But what they're watching doesn't have what we saw. They don't see, the broadcast coming out does not show the part where she looks at the radio and the cut hand and the blood. That isn't shown to them. They see something that it just skips over all of that. Like reality coming out of it is being edited. Other thing I missed is that as they're watching the second episode, they see their little drone turned into a helicopter and it's in color. And he's like, why did you colorize this? And like, we didn't. And they start to piece together, like, what? Something's going on. Something funky. He's like, it was changed to match the design of the show. What is going on here? So then finally we see Agent Woo and Kat Denning watching episode 3 and kind of getting actually invested in it. There's some fun little dialogue in there between the two of them. And it gets to the end of it, and Monica says he was killed by Ultron. And the same way that we went, wait, what just happened? They go, wait, what just happened? Is this the first time they mention anything? And then it just cuts to the credits. And they immediately go, wait a minute, something's off here. So all the time when we were watching it, and it would do that little skip, or it would cut backwards, or rewind, that's the broadcast going out, which is like meta inside of meta and all kinds of interesting stuff, to layers to which this is referencing itself and doing interesting, fun things with it. So I realized, wait, something's going on here. Who's editing this? What's going on? And it cuts then to inside of the episode, and we see the end of the episode, but not in WandaVision, not the broadcast coming out, not kind of running through the sitcom filter. We see it in kind of widescreen, properly colored. And whenever we see the stuff we didn't see before, where Monica's like, what do you mean? Who do you think I am? Like, no, you said Ultron. You don't belong here. You came from the outside. And she's not just like snapped a little bit out of it. Like, she's going full-blown angry Scarlet Witch. And angry Scarlet Witch is not someone you want to mess with. And she's like literally pulling up the energy balls that she used to like throw down on Thanos recently. And she's staring at Monica and like blasts her.
Because that's what heroes do.
Hardcore through the wall. And we kind of see a different perspective on the way the previous episode ended. And then Wanda uses her magic powers, fixes the wall. And Vision walks in, and we have this little moment where it briefly shows him as dead Vision. It is horrifying as he's walking around, and he's not aware of what's going on. And then he snaps it, like she kind of looks down, and he comes back to normal. And as has happened in the previous episodes, he knows something is up, and he's trying to kind of snap out of it. And she's like, hey, we don't have to stay here. We can leave. And she's like, no, this is our home. I have everything under control. And it's been hinting for about the last 5 minutes. It lingers on shots of her. Every time they say, who's doing this? It lingers on a shot of her. So she says, I have everything under control. Cuts to Monica outside, laying on the ground. She goes, it's Wanda. It's all of it. It's Wanda. Cuts back inside. And you see like this little look on Vision's face that he's worried. Like he knows something's off. And then they sit down, puts his arm around her, and then we get some Jimi Hendrix playing in the background, which is always a lot of fun. And our episode ends. Clearly, the implication of the end of the episode is that Wanda is the villain of the season.
Why would they do this?
Whether she's meaning to be a villain, whether she's in her sadness attempting to do something to soothe her, but in the process is hurting others. Whatever it is, she's the cause of what's happening. You got to keep in mind the context of this. We watched Infinity War years ago. But in the timeline of all of this, she got snapped. She got blipped. So she sees Vision die after, like, she saved him, but then Thanos rewinds time and then she loses him. She gets snapped out of existence, comes back, Endgame, and Vision's still gone. She's angry. So we saw her as angry, Wanda just throwing down on Thanos. But that was only a month before the events of this show where she was devastated. For us, we saw that happen multiple years ago. We saw that happen. To her, it was only a month ago. Powerful witch lady decides to use all of her powerful, weird witch lady powers to try and undo that. But I think you really have to keep in mind the actual timeline for her as someone that was blipped. This is a new recent wound. All that stuff at the beginning of Infinity War where she was wanting to settle down, they had a life away from everyone else. That is so present in her existence. To us, it was years ago. To her, it's days ago. And so in her pain, Seems like she's created this reality where it's this romanticized sitcom of sorts. So, why is it a sitcom? I have no idea. I'm intrigued to find out. Who's Catherine Hahn? What's the deal with her? Why is she not someone that appears to have been pulled from the outside world? I don't know. I'm interested. I want to find out. So, they raise a lot of questions. As I've said many times before, many times before, the first 3 episodes, it was tough for me to latch onto and know what I felt about it because there's just no context. I mean, it just dives straight into the sitcom world where they don't know why they're there and we don't know why they're there. Now we kind of have some ideas as to what's going on. And as I said before, I won't have a rating or a final thought on the whole season until I see where it all pays off. That's how these work. It's functioning as what this 3-4 hour movie, when you put them all together, broken up into these 9 episodes. And so you have to see where it pays off to know if it's actually good. I trust Kevin Feige. There's no reason not to. I'm not really nervous. I stand by kind of my previous thoughts that this was an awkward way to kick off Phase 4 because for me, I got 3 episodes with no context. For you, you got 2 episodes with no context, waited a week, got 1 more episode, and then you wait another week and you finally got the context. It's an awkward way to kick off the season, and it's not what they intended. They intended to kick it off with something more traditional, Black Widow, almost a year ago, and then it was supposed to be Falcon and the Winter Soldier. This was supposed to be the 3rd thing. And that feels like kicking off with something weird in that context makes a lot more sense than kicking off weird. But that's the world that we're in. I don't really fault them, but observationally speaking, it's a weird way to start things. I don't think it's what they wanted. It's certainly not what I would recommend. And likewise, I stand by kind of my thoughts that with what we've gotten thus far, it feels like this is a very bingeable show. Like, episodes ended, you immediately want to see the next one. You immediately want to run, like, what's going on? Okay, what's the next sitcom, and how's that going to work when we know that she's caught what? I have so many questions, and I want them answered, and I want to see it right now. So there's a lot of fun to all of this, to speculate as to where it's going, how it will affect the rest of all of this. It's pretty easy to start to see how this is going to tie to Multiverse of Madness when you have a scenario where clearly she's creating a reality and then there's going to be something about a multiverse and multiple realities. You can see how this could tie together with everything. So this is the context I needed. This gave me what I needed. But just in general, having weeks to process it and kind of buy the show on its own terms has also kind of helped me be a little bit more on board with it. But I can't wait till next week's episode. Let me know what you thought down below in the comments section. And keep talking movies, TV, and Marvel way too much.